We've got the deployment done, so it'd be good to take a step back and talk about the different components of our CDK project and how they work together. In the bin folder in gettingstarted.ts, we have a new cdk.app, okay? And then we've got a getting started stack, and you can see that the app's getting passed into getting started stack here. And then inside of getting started stack, we have a queue and a topic, and in both of those cases the stack we're in, this getting started stack, is getting passed into the queue and the topic. So the CDK application, or CDK project I should say, starts at the top level with an app, and we're always going to have one app inside of our CDK project. And then we've got to have a stack, but actually we can have multiple stacks if we want to. And there's a kind of a hierarchy here that the stack or stacks belong to the application. So let's draw a little link in there, another one in there. And then inside of our stack, we are going to have something called constructs. Now, a construct is a representation of some kind of infrastructure. And there are different levels of construct. So level 1 is the closest to a CloudFormation resource. Bear in mind that CDK is synthesizing our code into CloudFormation. So you can see that I've got a queue here, but actually this is a level of abstraction too high. If we did a new CFN queue, and we import that, I'm just going to give it some dummy parameters for now. The CFN here indicates that this is directly mapping to a CloudFormation resource. So this is level 1. This is the most simple form of constructs, and there's no real code behind this. If I pop into this class, we're going to get the TypeScript definitions, so let's pop over to the JavaScript, and unfortunately the CDK stuff is normally minified, so we can give that a bit of a format so we can have a look at it. And let's find CFNQ. So in the constructor we do a bit of plumbing here, it's not really relevant to us, and then when it's put together it's going to call this getter with CFN properties and fill out all of these fields that map directly to the value in CloudFormation, to the property in CloudFormation. So there's not much to it. Really, it's just a loose wrapper around a CloudFormation resource. Then the next level is layer 2 or level 2. And I like to see those as a developer experience layer put on top of some amount of CloudFormation resources. So when you want a queue, there's normally a lot of things you want to be able to do to it. You know, you probably want to receive some data from somewhere, you probably want to send the data on, and the topic.add subscription here is a little bit of a hint to how CDK uses object orientation to put a nice developer experience on top of the underlying stuff in AWS. So if I try the same for queue, what have we got for queue? So I've got add to resource policy, I've got grant, and so these are all permission related. We've got things to do with metrics, and really these are all helpers that may influence some piece of infrastructure that it's going to create. So if we put add to resource policy, then it's going to manage a queue policy for us, but we don't have to create that queue policy ourselves. All we have to do is specify the intent. Okay, I would like the queue policy to have these statements in, or this statement, and it will go away and manage that, and it will create that for us. So it's making our usage of these underlying AWS resources simpler, and it's giving us that kind of developer mindset, that way of saying, okay, if I was modeling these in an object-oriented way, how would I do it? Okay, right, let's build that into CDK. Let's make these nice constructs, and then those are going to get translated into the nitty-gritty of CloudFormation behind the scenes. So that's your level 2, if you like. The level above that is really when you're combining together lots of resources to form some piece of value. So let's talk about some examples. So we've got a construct here, and just like the stack belongs to our app, the construct belongs to the stack. So let me see if I can zoom in here a little bit. And that construct itself may have some child constructs. So let's put those on here. So it might use some constructs to do what it wants. And then these constructs themselves, you guessed it, can also use some other constructs. So you have all these layers of nesting here, if you like. And each layer or each component of these is some form of reusable infrastructure. So here's an example with just some numbers on for the constructs. What might these be? So we might have a construct for a CloudFront distribution, but it's not just a CloudFront distribution, it's actually for a private static website. And that construct might need an S3 bucket. And we might have an S3 bucket construct that follows our organizational standards. So it could be a construct for S3 buckets with secure defaults. And now that construct may rely on the level 2 construct for S3 buckets. So remember, level 2 is that it's not the raw CloudFormation resources, it's a developer experience layer put on top of the CloudFormation resources. And it also might use another construct. So it might be a construct for an API gateway if we want to do some kind of authentication with our CloudFront distribution. And that one might use a construct for a Lambda function, but it could be that we want to have a construct for a Lambda function following our standards or having some sensible defaults or some sensible monitoring or similar. So we'll say a construct for Lambda functions following our team's standards. And then that construct might itself use the level 2 construct for a Lambda. And as we'll find out later in the course, there's actually some really nice constructs that do a lot of heavy lifting for building Lambdas, for doing things that are serverless. So this construct here for private static website belongs to the stack. Whoops, need to select that one. And then the construct for an API gateway belongs to the private static website construct. The construct for a Lambda function following our standard belongs to the API gateway one, and then the level 2 construct for a Lambda function is called by that. And then we can have the same here. So this construct is also being used by our private static website construct. And then here's one for S3 buckets with secure defaults. So there's all these layers of nesting here as the constructs are built up and attached together and composed to form the bigger bit of value. So I would call this an L3 construct. It's a pattern for producing something. So it's our private static website in this case. And I think what you'll find is you can use the L2 constructs, these nice ones here like SQSQ and SNS topic, for the vast majority of use cases. Sometimes you can't quite customize them to do what you want, so you have to use the L1 construct. And then you can wrap up those L2 and L1 constructs to form something that makes sense for you or your team or your organization. So maybe it's secure defaults. Maybe you want particular monitoring standards in place, so you can do those with a construct. And you can share those internally, which is really helpful. And then those can be packaged up themselves to produce an L3 construct or a pattern, something that you regularly do yourself or regularly do as a team. So maybe it's a whole Lambda function and API gateway set up for a service. Maybe it's something like this, like a private static website. Maybe it's a containerized service. And that L3 construct could give you a whole containerized service, and then it's composed of lots of other parts. And we can build these all up so that everything we build follows our standards and is nice and secure and easy to run, operate in production. So just as a bit of a recap, we have one application in our CDK project. We can have one or more stacks. The default project just has one stack, just our getting started stack here, but we don't have to stick to that. And then we've got lots of constructs here getting used. So we have your level 1s, which is the raw CloudFormation resources. Level 2, a developer experience layer sitting on top of that, letting us use these nice object-oriented features like the topic.add subscription here. And then level 3 is a full featured chunk, a full thing like a pattern or a reference architecture. And that's the anatomy of our CDK application or CDK project.